Today's daf is Chulin daf Nun Aleph. And we are 18 lines from the bottom of daf Nun Amid Beis, the two dots, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Bigdoila V'chulu. Today's daf is being learned as a schus refuah shalema for Chava Miriam Bas Malka Freda and Shlomo ben Chayalea. Today's daf is also being learned Le'ilu Nishmas Yenta Bas Reb Moshe. So we're moving along in Perek Elu Trefis, discussing the stomachs, Lashon Rabim, of an animal in the context of the laws of Elu Trefis. So at the end of yesterday's daf, we spoke about the keres, or the kores. Specifically, the keres hapnimi, where the Mishnah says that part of the keres is extremely sensitive. Ad kedei kach, if there would be a nekev the size of a mashahu, that already would render it a treifa. What about the rest of the keres? What about the quote-unquote keres, not apnimi, but hachitzoina? So the Mishnah said that's a lot less sensitive, and there the halach is, if it was nikra roiv of the keres, then it would be considered a treifa. So as it relates to the keres hapnimis, that's if it's just nikfa. As it relates to the keres hachitzaina, that requires not nikfa. Nikra, how much of it has to be torn? It would have to be the majority of it. And then the Mishnah mentioned the opinion of one of the sages, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Hagdoila, it's not so simple. As it relates to the keres hachitzaina, in the event that the animal's a big animal, which pasha you would think means like a shor, a big animal. So then the halacha is that as long as the tear is a tefach, that would already render it a treifa. V'haktana, and in the event that it's a ktana, then beruba, then it would be toli and roif. So whereas according to the Tanakama, according to the Chachamim in the Mishnah, when you deal with the keres hachitzaina, we don't care how big or small the animal is. We don't care how big or small the keres is. If it's nikra ruba, it's considered a treifa, and if it's not nikra ruba, it's not considered a treifa. In the world of Rabbi Yehuda, it actually depends. Not all animals were created equally as it relates to treifas. In the event that it's a gedola, so then you don't need roif. Then, as long as it's a tefach, that in and of itself is going to be okay. Today's daf is going to begin with the statement of an Amayra who said a little bit of a pirish into what exactly Rabbi Yehuda meant when he said Gedola versus Ktanas. Rabbi Yehuda Omer b'Gedola v'chulu. Omer Rabbi Yamin bar Yefes. Omer Rabbi Lazar. Loi Gedola Mamish. When Rabbi Yehuda said Gedola, he didn't mean Gedola Mamish. So what does it mean Gedola Mamish? So Rashi says Gedola sheb b'Gedolas. He didn't mean the biggest animal that there is. V'loi Ktana Mamish. And Ktana doesn't mean Ktana sheb b'Ktanas. Ella. So what's the definition of Gedola? What's the definition of Ktana? Kol shenikra ba tefach. In the event that a tefach would be torn, ruba, and it would not constitute a roiv. Zuhi sheshaninu bigdayla tefach. That's what Rabbi Yehuda is referring to when he says by a gdayla the shear is going to be a tefach. Ruba v'loy havi tefach. What would be if roiv of it was torn and it's not a tefach? Well, that means that the keres is pretty small. Zuhi sheshaninu bigtana beruba. That's what he meant when he said that in the event that it's small, it's going to be roiv. In other words, when Rabbi Yehuda said gedayla ktana, he doesn't care so much big, huge animal versus a small animal. That's not what he is zeroing in on. What Rabbi Yehuda is trying to say is that once you have a tear the size of a tefach, at that point, it's automatically going to be a treifa. You're not going to need a roiv. The whole shear of roiv is in the event that the animal's so small, so that you have roiv where it's less than a tefach. If it's roiv, you can't get this animal to be treated like a kosher animal where roiv of it was already nikra. But in the event that the animal has a tear that's a tefach, and that tefach doesn't constitute a roiv. Why? Because it's a quote-unquote gedola. Gedola shebigdolas? No, it just means it's big to the point that a tefach makes up less than roiv. The whole thing could be 2.5 tefachim, but that shear of a tefach is going to be less than a roiv. The halach is that too would be a treifa. So whereas according to the Tanakama, the shear is always roiv, according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's going to be roiv. However, to the extent that it hits a tefach, at that point, even if it's not a roiv, it's going to... So the bottom line is, you can never have a tear more than a tefach in the world of Rabbi Yehuda. Says the Gemara, Ruba v'le'avi tefach pshita. So Rabbi Yehuda said two things, right? He said in the event that it's a gedolos, then the shear is going to be a tefach. In the event it's a ketana, then it's going to be beroiv. And Rabbi Binyamin Bar Yefes explained in the name Rabbi Lazar what exactly Rabbi Yehuda was referring to. So he said that the gedolah doesn't mean mamish, but rather what it means is kol shenikra ba tefach v'lo havi ruba. And what does the ketana mean? The ketana means in the event where you have a ruba v'lo havi tefach. Right? So if it's ruba v'le'avi tefach at that point, the Gemara's kasha is that part of Rabbi Yehuda is essentially the shitas hachachamim. So that l'chura should be pshita. Why did Rabbi Yehuda? Why does Rabbi Binyamin Bar Yefes Amar Rabbi Lazar need to explain that part of the equation? Isn't that included in the sheet of the Tanakama? Now the lashon of the Gemara is pshita. It's pshita. It's the sheet of the Tanakama. It's not pshita. So Rashi says it actually is pshita, the ruba kakulai. Because being that ruba is kakulai, once it's nikra ruba, at that point it's as if you don't have it. And if you don't have it, it's for sure pshita. But the Gemara's kasha is that why does Rabbi Yehuda need to repeat the ruba v'loi havi tefach part of the equation? That is essentially the sheet of the Tanakama. It's pshita, and the Gemara says a very surprising teretz. Lo tzricha. I'll tell you why Rabbi Yehuda felt he had to say it. It's talking about the havet tefach b'mashu. As machlokes Rashi and Tosfos b'shem Rabbeinu Chananel had to learn Pashut Pshat in this Gemara. We're going to learn shitas Rashi, even though it's a very surprising shita. And that is, it's talking about a situation where it was a tefach b'mashu. Had there been another mashu of tir, at that point the tir would have been a full tefach. So the shear was less than a tefach. It was roiv. So, Roiv, even if it's less than a tefach, Ruba v'le'avi tefach, zui sheshoninu biktana beruba. But if it would have torn a drop more, at that point it would have been a tefach. Ma'u detema, I would have had this wild havamina. Being that it's so close to being a tefach, so maybe we're not going to view it as a treifa until it hears that extra tefach, or that extra mashu that makes it a tefach. Mashmalon, that's the chiddush of ruba v'le'avi tefach. Even if the v'le'avi tefach is off by a mashu, afilu hachi ruba v'le'avi tefach. That's going to be the halacha. Toi says, I never heard such svar in my whole life. You're telling me that ruba kakuloi. You're telling me that the shear should be roy, but your roiv is so close to a tefach, you might as well round it off to a tefach, and at that point, when you get the tefach, then we'll have this conversation. Why are we talking when it's $99.99? At a penny, it'll be $100, then we'll have this conversation. I just can't even fathom what this svara would be. Again, it's very inconsistent with the svaras of the way Gemaras and Rishonim and Achronim usually operate. Ayin Sham B'Tosfos. Says the Gemara, Omer Geniva Omer Rabasi. Geniva said the name Rabasi, Niktor Kesela, in the event that the Keres HaChitzayna has a hole, and the hole was the size of a sela, a coin, treifa would be considered a treifa. Why? She'imti matach tamid ala tefach. This is all in Shitas Rabbi Yehuda. Where Rabbi Yehuda holds that a tefach, even if it's less than roiv, in the Keres HaChitzayna would be considered a treifa. Says Geniva in the name of Rabasi, if there's a round hole the size of a sela, you should know that's the equivalent thereof of a sela. So you got to do a little math, pi, right? Get involved in all the geometry of circles. But the point is, if there's a hole the size of a sela, that means it's the equivalent thereof of a tefach. What does it mean? She'imti matach. If you would straighten out, if you would pull the circle and turn it into just a regular size hole, what you would end up with is a tefach. Oh, a tefach, that's considered a treifa. Amr Rabbi Barabba said, he said, I heard from Geniva, he says, I even remember where I was. I was on the bridge that's near Naharda. And he explained to me that this Mesorah that he was mekabel from Ravasi, Nikdera Kesela, is considered a treifa. It's Kesela Ksheira, Yeser Mi Kesela Treifa. So even though the words sound like Nikdera Kesela Treifa, he explained to me that if it's exactly a sela, it's actually going to be kosher. If it's a little bit more than a sela, that's when you're going to have a problem. The kama yeser mi kesela. How big is yeser mi kesela? Now it sounds like this shear of Nikdera Kesela was supposed to be explanatory, right? You're not supposed to ask on the mashal. If you have to ask on the mashal, then the mashal didn't really serve you well. But I guess if you were there, you knew what it was. But these halachas travel from place to place and from generation to generation. So maybe later Amiram that lived in a different geographic area. So they heard this Niktar Kesela. Okay, so if you know what a quarter looks like, so you can be mamchesh it. But I live in a whole different world. We use credit cards here, so I don't even know what a seller looks. I haven't seen a coin in 10 years. So the question is, what exactly does it mean Niktar Kesela? Right? What is the definition of seller and not seller? Yasam Kesela, because Kesela we said is really ksheira. So what is the definition of Yasam Kesela? Rav Yosef said, the island class kashiyasa. It's a hole that's big enough for 3 date pits to be able to go through. Now you're going to have to know what a date pit is, but that's for extra credit. But either way, so if it's big enough that 3 date pits can go through, bitsipa. Now if it has a little bit of fruit on it, right? So after you finish a fruit, unless you really, really, really are a medaktik and baltashris and you know how to get every last little bang for your buck, so you're going to have a little bit of fruit that's still going to be attached to the pit. So if it's bitzipa, if it's still somewhat covered with some of the meat of the fruit, then beduchka. So then, as long as it can kvetch its way through, that would be the shear. But light tzipa, and it has to be a shear where if it doesn't have any fruit, berafcha, then it's going to be able to go berafchis. It's going to be able to come and go very, very freely. Says the Gemara Vaita. Hemses ubeis hakoisos. So we now turn our attention to the next 2 stomachs of the animal, the hemses and the beis hakoisis, respectively. So the Mishnah said that as it relates to the hemses and the beis hakoisis, shenikvu lachutz, in the event that they have a nekev, and the nekev is lachutz, meaning you could see it, mibachutz, the halacha is that would render it into a treifa. Now, the tiny bit of background that we need to understand the hemses and the beis hakoisis for this next Gemara that we're going to learn is that the wall of the hemses and the beis hakoisis was a double wall. Right, specifically the beis hakoisis is what we're going to focus on. So it had this double layered wall. So when you talk about there being a hole in the wall, so you have to know, is it the inner wall or is it the outer wall? And in Svara, there's makom to say that if the hole is in the inner wall, lav dafke would render it a treifa, because as long as the outer wall is intact, so the outer wall would be shmira, it would protect, and as a result, maybe it wouldn't be an issue. Says the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanan, machat shenimtzas b'oiv beis hakoisis, in the event that a machat, a needle was found in the thickness of the wall of the beis hakoisis. Mitzad echad, if it's only from one side, and what does it mean from one side? It means mibafnim. If it's the inner part, ksheir, it's going to be kasha. Mishnei atztadim. If it's on the inner part and on the outer part, treif, it's going to be a treifa. Why, if it's only the inner part, is it going to be kosher? Because it has the shmira, it's being protected from the outer part. If it goes through and through, it's on both sides. So if you were inside the beis hakoisis, you would see the hole, and if I was on the outside of the beis hakoisis, I would see the hole. So if it's mibafnim, mibachutz, that's when it's going to be a treifa. Stating that it's not always considered a treifa. There is a little bit of a analysis that you can do, a bedika, to determine. In the event that the needle had a little bit of blood on it, well then, then you know for sure the needle got there before the shchita. The animal was alive, hence the blood, and if that's the case, it's obviously going to be a treifa. If, however, you couldn't find the dam, then you know what happened after the shchita, and here's the point. Even if you have a nekev on both sides, which ordinarily would make it a treifa, but if there's no blood, that's actually a simin muvik, that this took place after the shchita. If it took place after the shchita, you don't have to worry. So this is one of the interesting themes that repeat itself a lot in Parakelu Treifas. Number one, what's a treifa? Number two, even if this is a treifa, do you know for sure it was there lifnei shchita? So that when you shechted it, you shechted a treifa. Maybe this is something that came about after the fact, right? There's so much tinkering with the animal. It's in this huge manufacturing facility. There's schlachtoys. I mean, it goes on there, blood and knives and screaming and koilas, and there's a lot of people working there. It's a massive plant, so you could see why things could happen after the shechita. So that's always the other question you want to ask yourself. So what the Bryce is saying is that as it relates to the definition of treifa, with regards to the beis hakoisos, it would have to be mishnei atztadim. If the hole is only on the inside, it's protected on the outside. Inside, outside, that's when you got yourself into an issue. Additionally, there is a bedika, very basic bedika that you could do after the fact that may get you out of the situation, even if the machat's on both sides. And that is, loy nimtza le'akayretna. Because if you don't find any blood, so what do you mean? somebody punctured the animal in this way, how did it not bleed? Oh, it entered the guf after the animal was dead already. Oh, if it was dead, that's why it didn't bleed. And it's so clear, biyodua, shalach hashchita, even though we're dealing with dairais over here, we're allowed to rely on that experiment 100%. Says the Bryce, so higlit piyamako. What would be if there was a scab that was around this area that the hole is biyodua, so then you know not only is it clear that it happened while the animal was alive and it had the vibrancy and the potency to be able to develop this scab, but it must have been that this issue was already there 3 days prior. Lamay nafkamina. Who cares if it happened 1 minute earlier or if it happened 3 minutes earlier? So, as we'll see from the next line of Gemara, it's negeya choshe mishpat. It's negeya. This is a fascinating halach. In the event that somebody went and he bought this animal, and then he found out that it was a treifa, he might want to get his money back. In the event that he shechts it, and he finds out that this animal has a machad in the Beis HaKosis, and there's even a scab, well, that means that whatever had happened already 3 days earlier. So if this buyer bought within that 3-day window, he could actually claim mekach tois, and he'd be able to get his money back. Let's say you don't have this scab. That's how you know we're dealing with Choshe Mishpat over here. How often are you going to invoke these words here in Masechtas Chulin? But in that case, you would have to prove that it was there 3 days earlier or not, and assuming you won't be able to prove it, says the Gemara. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. You're telling me now that there's this incredible kula when it comes to treifas, and that is if you see a hole and there's no blood, biyadua shalach hashchita. How come I never heard about this until now? We're mamish making our way through the list of all the treifas and the Mishnah in the beginning of the parak, and this is the first time I'm hearing about it, says the Gemara. Why is it that when it comes to all the other nekavim, no one ever heard such halacha? In other words, the hafal after lekadam tarif mar, even if there's no dam, but mar, the Rebbe, whoever the Rebbe is, right? It's not clear who's asking this kasha. It's just a stam brisa with a stam Gemara. Stam Gemara is Rav Ashi, see Tosfos, that beis on beis. But the bottom line is, maishna mikol nekuvidei alma, dafak after lekadam tarif mar. How come dafka when it comes here? Do you have this halacha? So Gemara says, I'm going to tell you why. Hassam, when it comes to other nikavim, like a midi lemisrach, there's nowhere for the dam to go. So you want to know why you don't see dam? Where do you want to see dam? On the walls of the animal? You want to see it in the fats of the animal? You're not going to find it anywhere. Hach over here, even the ikam machat. We're dealing with is a machat. Oh, isa the koidim shchitu misrach habesarach. Here you're dealing with a needle. The needle would have a little bit of blood on it, some dried out blood. So enochanami, when you're dealing with a neked that involves a machat, so then it would be true, which is exactly what this Bryson is talking about, a regular nekev in the reya, or that doesn't involve any physical matter for the blood to be able to plant itself on. So over there wouldn't be any simin one way or the other. Amli Rav Safra la Abaya. Rav Safra told Abaya, Chazim Mar. So now we know who Mar is, right? Rav Safra is talking to Abaya. Abaya is the Rebbe, right? The word Mar in Chazal means Rebbe. So Chazim Marav Snafra tells Abaya, take a look, Rebbe. There's a certain young man, he came from Eretz Yisrael. And he said, Rabbi Avira Shmani. He said, my name is Rabbi Avira. And he said, Ma'aseh was a story of name Rebbe. That all of a sudden, a machat, right, a person carrying the machat, that was in the walls of the Beis HaKosis, only on one side. You're only able to see me b'fnim. It walked in to the Beis Medrash of Rebbe, and Rebbe took a look at the Beis HaKosis for Tarfa, and he said it's a treifa. Now, when Abaya heard this, Abai wanted to meet this person. He wanted to get a little bit more information. So the Gemara says, Shalach le. So Abaya sent for Rabbi Avira. Rabbi Avira did not go to Abaya. So Abaya says, okay, Yagati umatzasi tamin. Sometimes you have to follow the halacha if you want to be able to get what it is you're trying to get. So he goes to Rabbi Avira and have a koya igra. And when he came to Rabbi Avira, right, they told him where he was staying. He looks up and Rabbi Avira is standing on the roof. Omar Abaya tells Rabbi Avira, Nechos mar v'nesi, can you please come down? I want to talk to you. He says, no, I can't come down. So Abaya said, no worries. So Abaya starts, climbing the ladder or climbing the steps. He goes up, Amar le, and he looks at him and he says, I have to ask you a question. Says, okay, am I in trouble? Is everything all right? Says, yeah, it's fine. I heard from Rav Saf, from my Talmud, that you told him over a story that there was a machat shenimtzas ba'ivi beis hakoisis mitzad echad. You were only able to see it from the inside, and it appeared in front of the great Rabbi Yehuda Anasi, V'tarfa, and he said it's a treifa. Can you give me a little bit more information? Amalei. So Rav Yehuda said, yes, mafter knesias ana. He said that I'm a mafter knesias. Rashi says that he was somebody that used to, take care of the Talmidim. I spent time in the Beis Medrash, le'ela me Rebbe Rabba, and I worked in the presence of Rabbi Yehuda Anasi. Rav Huna Tzipoira v'Rab Yosi Mada Yoishvin Lefanov, and Rav Huna Tzipoira and Rabbi Yosi Mada, they were sitting in front of him. Ubas Lifnei Rebbe Machat Shnim basically Mitzad Echad, and this exact story happened. V'Havcha Rebbe, and what Rebbe did was, he took the Beis HaKoisis, he started playing with it, he flipped it this way, that way, and he found there was blood on it, v'tarfa, and he went and he made it into a treifa. V'omar, and he said, Im ein sham dam, if there was Im ein sham makkah, if there was no makkah, then koyret dam yinayin. Then how could there have been dam? Must be there was a makkah, and if there was a makkah, that's why he went ahead and he made it into a treifa. In other words, he told him that the story is that Rebbe saw blood. And because he saw blood, he understood that this hole must have been Beis Hatzadim, because the machat must have came from the outside, and it must have penetrated and created this hole, and it was for that reason he went ahead and he was tarfa. So you remember the story? The story was, Rab Safra tells Abaya, the Rab Avira came and he said, Maisu balufnei Rebbe, machat shenimtzas b'oivi beis hakoisis mitzad echad v'tarfa. And Abai was very taken aback, because we know the Messiah is, if it's only mitzad echad, it's not a treifa. It has to be Beis Hatzadim. So Abaya flags down this Rabbi Avira. He gets to him finally, a little bit of drama. They're having this conversation rooftop, and finally he tells him, you want to know what the story was? There was blood there. And because there was blood, the Rebbe understood that it must have been a real nekev mi Beis Hatzadim. So Amalei Abai turned to Rabbi Avira. He said, Torach tarchi lahu gavra. He said, I was so matriach to come to you because I thought I was going to hear something novel. And it turns out masnisani. It turns out whatever your maisa was is a mefurish mishnah. Hemsis to Beis HaKoises shenimchu lachutz. The halach is, it's considered a treifa. And being that there's a keretam, bal korchach, the nekev was on the other side as well. There's no news here. There's no story here. I'm not even sure why I ever came. Nothla min hagar. Going back to the Mishnah. So the Mishnah mentioned another one of the treifas is that in the event that an animal would fall off the roof, right? So an animal fell from the gag. So we go from Rabbi Avira and Abaya being on the roof. Baruch Hashem, nothing happened. To now we're talking about an animal that's on the roof, and unfortunately that story didn't end as well. But this animal was nafla min agag. So the halacha is, even if you don't see anything that necessarily makes us think that there's a treif over here, afilu hachi, the halacha is we have to be chayesh v'tarfas. So nafla min agag in and of itself is a reason to assume that there might be an issue of treif. Now from here until the end of today's daf, through the beginning of tomorrow's daf, we're going to deal with this general halacha. Not to give it away, but just one spoiler alert that's going to emerge from learning the Gemara is that if an animal falls off a roof, we don't necessarily automatically assume that this animal is going to be a treif. Oh, it fell off a roof, boom. Must be there's something wrong in one of its internal organs, and as a result, you're never going to be able to eat this animal. That's not true. The first thing we do is we take a look at how the animal responds. And we'll see. It's mefurish halachis. If the animal gets up, what if it gets up and it walks? What if it tried to get up? What if it thought about trying to get up? A lot of permutations, as we'll see. But the bottom line is, so we look at the reaction of the animal. Another huge factor is that if 24 hours pass and this animal, as far as we're concerned, is doing okay, well, at that point, we're going to assume that whatever happened didn't really happen, and as a result, everything is going to be fine. So with that little bit of a spoiler, Zok the Heilige Gemara. Naflam in Agag, an animal falls off a roof, that's high level, a reason to be concerned. Amar Rav Huna said, some interesting halachas. If somebody left his animal on the roof, Uba, and then he came back, and he found it on the ground, and what he do? He took the elevator, he's trying to figure out how the animal came down. So even though it seems like he must have jumped, but at the same time, you don't necessarily assume that something happened to its Evarim, right? Risuke Evarim means that the Evarim got dislodged, they got punctured, it was torn, right? You don't assume that something necessarily necessarily happened. And the reason is that even though, as far as we're concerned, the animal probably took a spring, but he probably did it in a methodical way. He probably did it in a way where he knew he wasn't going to injure himself. He had a safe, smooth landing. And as a result, even though there are things to potentially be concerned about, we're not going to be worried. Who got you? The Ravina. Ravina owned a goat. The Chazak Chushla, and one day, Ravina's goat is on the roof of the house, and he looks through the window that he has, and he sees some barley. And the barley was something that really, really tempted the goat. So there was like a skylight. He's looking down at the window. He says, I have to get my hands on that barley. So what did he do? Dagar, he jumped, and he fell to the ground. And after this happened, Ravina wasn't sure. Is this like a Naflam and Agag? It's not a Naflam and Agag. And he comes to his great Rebbe, his mentor Rav Ashi. And Amalei, he told him, with a whole chakir. This Rav Huna said, when Rav Huna said that if somebody leaves his animal on the roof, and then he finds it on the bottom, you don't have to be chayish, because we assume that the animal acted with intention, with kavana, and he did everything the way he was supposed to do it. Is it mishum de islay midil misrach? Is it, meaning, what's the lumdus, a chakira hayudua in this halacha? Is it because we assume that when the animal came down, it clawed its way down on the side of the wall, and as a result, it was able to make it down properly. Islay midil misrach. Misrach means it has something to latch onto. So, miloshin sircha, right? So it knew how to make its way down. Well, if that's the case, over here, this is a free fall. He had no way to, right? There's no proverbial ladder. You can't hold on to the side of a mountain or something. So if that's the case, here you would have to be concerned. Oidilmo, said Ravina, maybe that's not the lumdus of Rav Huna. But maybe what he meant was, mishum da nafsha. An animal's not going to jump unless it assesses the situation properly, and he knows that he can do it. Well, if that's the case, fine, nafsha, then you would assume this is going to be okay. Either way, Ravina comes to Rav Ashi holding a goat that just took a nosedive, and he has a whole chakira, a chakira in Rav Huna's halacha. Amalei, Rav Ashi turned to Ravina. He said, this is a pashta shayla. Mishum da nafsha, v'ainam le nafsha. He immediately picked one of the two sides of the chakira, and he gave him the halacha. Says the Gemara, he imra said the Habibei Rav Chaviva. Rav Chaviva's house, they owned the sheep. The Havashadron Kare Basraisa. And one day it was walking, it was schlepping its leg. Amar Rav Yema said, Hai shegroina nakte. I think that the reason this is happening is, it could be, maybe it's something's wrong with its foot, it's not feeling well, but don't necessarily assume that because it's schlepping its leg, that this means this animal has an hour to live and that it's a treifa. There's no reason to assume that. Maska for Ravina, so Ravina heard this. He said, "V'domo chuta shedra ifsik." So he said, how do you know? Maybe there's something wrong with its spinal cord. Maybe something very serious happened. So the Gemara says, "Batkua." They were baidik it. Ashkachua Ravina, and Ravina mamish kishkaga sheyatza milifnei ashalit. Right? He turned out being right. But the Gemara says, "Vafilu hachi hilchas Rav Yemar." Even though Ravina said that. But the halacha is like Rav Yemar, because Shigroin is shchiach, right? Shigroin is shchiach, chut hashedra lo shchiach. But the chut hashedra is lo shchiach, and as a result, this is not something you have to worry about. You know, the Welt says, what did the hypochondriac write on his tombstone? I told you so, right? Sometimes you get it right, but in reality, it's like shchiach. This is not something that you necessarily have to worry about. Zok the Gemara, Amar Rav Huna. Rav Huna said, Scharim hamenach says, what happens if you have scharim? So these male sheep, like rams, and they're beating each other up. Ein chayshishin bishum risukei avarim. So you have these rams, they're going at it, and you have to assume now that, you know, somebody tore an ACL in one of these little scuffles. So that's the question here. Said Rav Huna, no, scharim hamenach says, ein chayshishin bishum risukei avarim. It's interesting. It's another kula from Rav Huna in the world of treifas. The first halacha was also Rav Huna. Hiniach behema l'mayla uba umatzah l'mata ein chayshishem mishum risukei avarim. Here too, scharim hamenakhin zeh ein chayshishem mishum risukei avarim. Says Rav Huna, like after mitfu v'kaimu, and even though these animals are walking around limping, they're in pain, they're schwitzing, right? they look the look, but simra ba'amahu denakalu. The reason they're schwitzing, they have a little bit of a fever. Yeah, their body temperature, their heart rate is pumping. But at the same time, you don't necessarily have to assume that they're dying. And says the Gemara, stating that in the event that they were playing the tackle version of this sport, if they actually were on the ground, well, at that point, if their mom is getting bulldozed by linebackers, that situation, then already there's a shayla of treifas. Look, the Gemara, Amar Ramenashi said, "Hani dichri de gan v'ganovi." Another very interesting halacha. In the event that ganovim come and they steal sheep, ein chosheshin mishum risukei varm. You don't have to be worried about risukei varm. So let's work on the visual here for a second. The ganav comes into the barn and he starts taking sheep. Right? He has a whole getaway car on the other side, and he starts taking sheep and he's throwing them over the fence. Another one and another one and another one. Well, these sheep are being tossed literally. So there's reason to assume that if one of these sheep land in the wrong way, it might have a little risukei varm. You can see why they might need a chiropractor after this. So the question is, do you have to be chayish? Do you don't have to be chayish? So Menashi said something very interesting. He said, "Ein chayish mishum risukei varm." You know why? Because kishadi lahu. So you have to be a ganav to appreciate this. But kishadi lahu, when they would throw them, amasnayu shadi lahu, they would throw them in a way where they would land in a position where they're ready to run, to fly. Right? Because at some point there's going to be a chaptzim here. Remember the dog that protects all the sheep? When he finds that, he's not going to be happy. So there's going to be a situation, so they throw it in a way where it's actually going to have a safe landing. It's like this, they should be able to run. Here's the interesting halach. But what would happen if these ganovim, right after they steal, they have the hira tshuva, and they realize, something, we shouldn't be doing this. What are we doing? So then they take the animals and they throw them back. Well, in that case, well, actually, I gave it away a little bit. When they throw it back, we are chayish, and the reason is, no, take that whole story back. In the event that they throw it back, and then we are chayish. Why are we chayish? Because when you throw it back, you're not so sensitive to what's going on. That's only if they threw it back because they heard the dogs coming, right? Guys are coming out with rifles. And you take the sheep, you throw it, you don't care about safe landings, you're worried about your own landing, and then you start running as fast as you could. But if the reason they threw the animal back was machmas tshuva, we assume they did tshuva samishkol, and just like when they ganved it, they threw it the right way. When they threw it back, they did it the right way. No, I'm kidding. But they're doing tshuva samishkol, and as a result, for sure, there's no question, when they return it, they want to make sure they're returning it properly. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. This is in the name of Rav. In the event that somebody hits his animal on his head, the whole klap is nova, and this guy, when he hit it on the head, so he's not the best aim in the world. He hits it in the head, but the stekin that he used made its way down to the zonov. So he ended up not just hitting it on the head, he ended up like hitting it along the length of the animal. So the halach is, or it happened the reverse. He was trying to hit the tail and he ended up hitting like the whole length of the animal. Or he hit it along the entire spinal cord. You don't have to be worried about risukei avar. The reason is, as we'll see in a minute, even though hitting the animal in and of itself maybe would give us reason to be concerned a little bit about risukei avar, but if you hit in a way where you distribute the force of the hit, so there's no one area that got the brunt of it, and as a result, you don't have to be concerned. That's the whole point. Hikal roishna v'hol chala klapi nava, al znava v'hol chala klapi roisha. It's the distribution of the blow that tells us I don't really have to be so worried. Now, if ish shalom chutra al palge de gaba, what would be in the event that the hit would be such that you hit it only on half, well, in that case, you would have to be worried. In the event that this thing that was used had knots in it, so because it had knots in it, so when you hit it, it's going to be very, very hard. Well, in that case, always chayshinim, because that's just very, very aggressive. That's cruel and unusual. And in that situation, you're always going to have yourself a problem. Additionally, if you hit the animal, not on the length of the animal, but on the width of the animal. So again, there the blow is much more concentrated. It's like hitting it on half of the length of the animal. The width and the half of the length is, sort of the same inyan. And in that case, chayshinan, again, you would have to be worried. Another halacha. Amar Rav Nachman. Beis harechem ein boy mishum risukei avarim. A child that's born, do we have to assume that maybe this little baby, because it went through the Beis HaRechem, it went through childbirth, so maybe that caused some sort of risukei avarim? Interesting question. An animal that falls, you have to be concerned. An animal that's playing in the field, you have to be concerned. So you see that anytime an animal deals with some trauma, you have to be chayish that maybe there's risukei avarim. Okay, Leida is to a degree ein lecha trauma gedola mizu. So you have to be concerned that in the process of the Leida of the animal, maybe there was some risukei avarim and azul yavish. Now you can ask me, if that's the case, how could you ever eat an animal? How could you ever eat an animal, right? You always have a problem. So the answer is 24 hours. Again, there is workarounds to this whole concept, as we're going to see on Amid Beis. But for now, high level, later, does that create this trauma that triggers risukei avarim or not? Rav Nachman told us the halacha, Beis HaRechem, ein boy mishum risukei avarim. So the Gemara says, somebody Rav Nachman. So Rav told his Rebbe Rav Nachman, he said, Tanya the Messiah Allah, I have a raya to you, a geschmacka raya from a brayso, a tinik ben yom echad, a tinoik that's 1 day old, metama beziva. In the event that some ziva emerges from the body of this tinoik ben yom echad, so the halacha is, there's already Tumah Ziva. Meaning Tumah Ziva doesn't require an age. A Tinuk Ben Yom Echad already has Tumah Ziva. What's the kasha gevaldik? Yisol Kedaitach Rava said, if you're going to tell me, yesh by Mishum Risukei Avarim, that is Risukei Avarim when it comes to lady, Ikri Kam Mipsar V'lei Machmas Einsoy. Why is this not a perfect example of the halacha that says Mipsaroi V'lei Machmas Einsoy? So the pasuk in the parish of Zava says, Ish Ki Yezav Mipsaroi Zoivoi Tamehu. Chazal learned from here that the only time ziva that emanates from a body is metama if it happened naturally. But if you can attribute it to anything, you could attribute it to the fact that it wasn't well or some trauma, whatever it might have been, then the halach is it's not going to be metama. Now, if you're going to tell me that Leidas yesh by mishum risukei avarim, that means it's a trauma. If it's a trauma, tinik ben yom echad should never be able to be a zav, and it's a brisa that he is a zav. L'chur, that should be the best example of the world of mipsara v'loy machmas oitzai. Just like you're suggesting, it might be the best example of the world of a treifa of risukei avarim, and you see it's not. Oh, Tanya Mitzayelach, you see that even though you would think the Beis HaRechem should be an issue, but loylam it's not. But the Gemara says no. Rayhach my skin against yotze derech doifen. Maybe that brisa is talking about where the animal was a yotze doifen. It came out surgically. It came out not naturally through the Beis HaRechem, but rather it came out through a procedure. It was a C-section. Oh, in that situation, we're not having the conversation. The whole conversation is when it goes through the Beis HaRechem, which is somewhat unnatural, that's why we're concerned. But enochinami, to the extent that it came out, Yoitza Doifen, and the Chanami, that would be the halach. Tashma, another right from a brayse, Egel Shanol B'Yantiv, an Egel, not a Beitza Shanol B'Yantiv, but an Egel Shanol B'Yantiv, Sheich the Noisai. The halach is, you're allowed to shecht it B'Yantiv, on Yantiv. Now this is a Muktzah Sugya, but you see Mefurish, Egel Shanol B'Yantiv, Sheich the Noisai B'Yantiv. That means you're shechting it that day. That means you don't have to wait 24 hours. So you see Mefurish is no halacha of Me'es La'es, which means that when an animal is delivered, there's no chashash of risukei avarim. The Gemara says, "Hachinami kiyon sheyatza derech doifen." It's talking about where it wasn't a natural delivery, but rather it was a yotza doifen. Being that it was a yotza doifen, in that situation, you obviously don't have to worry. The Gemara says, "Tashma." I have another raya, also a geshmaka raya. V'shavin. Everybody agrees. Shem noilad hu mumay imay. In the event that an animal is born together with its mum, shezem enamuchen. It's considered enamuchen. So the context over here is bechayros, and we know a bechar has to go to the kayin, right? A bechar animal has to go to a kayin. What does the kayin do with it? It depends. In the event that it's a perfect animal, then the halach is he has to be makriv it as a carbon. If it has a mum, so then it's something that he's allowed to eat. It's literally as if it's chulin. What happens if an animal develops a mum on yontif? Developed a mum on yontif. So that's a machlekes, whether or not the kohen would be allowed to eat it or not. What's the shaila? Do we look at it as muktzah? Betchilas yontif, it was not something that you could eat on yontif because it's kachim. It's not a carbon that's toichi yontif, and as a result, you aren't going to be able to eat it. Now that it developed a mum, so now it's technically ein bein Shabbos liyontif elo oichel nefesh b'vad. It's oichel nefesh. It should be okay. That's a shaila. So the brisa picks up and says v'shavin. Those two bali plukta that argued regarding the bechar that develops a mum on yontif, whether you could eat it or not. They agree that if the bechar was noilad, if it was noilad together with the mum, that the halach is it's muchan, you'd be allowed to eat it. What's the kasha? Another tashma. How could you tell me that if the animal was born with its mum on yontif, eat it, I can't eat it anyways. Because if it was born on Yontif, so I have a problem of Risak Evarim. I have to wait 24 hours to make sure that there's not going to be an issue over here. And the Gemara says, you'll tell me, this is the third time we asked this kasha. We asked this kasha about the Tinik Ben Yomecha that's Mentamim Beziva. We asked it regarding the Egel Shanoilet B'Yontif. So good, I'll tell you the same thing. It was born Yaitze Doifen. But you can't say that. You know why? Because Derech Doifen, Mi Kaddish, then it wouldn't have Kedushas Bechar, because V'ha'amar Rabbi Yochanan said, Moida Hay Rab Shimon was Moida, Le'inyin Kachim, as it relates to Kachim, She'enai Kaddish. There's no Kedusha to a Bechar that was born Yotzei Doifin. So obviously it wasn't Yotzei Doifin, but the Gemara says you have to say a new Teretz Chachmai Askinon. This price is talking about Shehifris Al Gabi Karka. It's talking about where right after the animal was born, it clawed its feet into the karka. If an animal does that, that's also a sign of life and a vibrancy, and in that case, you don't even have to wait 24 hours. At that case, you know for sure that it is going to be, so very geschmack. Rav Nachman said a halacha. His halacha was Beis Harechem, Ein B'im Yishum Risukei Evarim, and the Gemara did what it always does, a few tashmaz. It's a beautiful example of how the entire Torah just all interconnects. We're dealing with the Beis Harechem of Ein B'im Yishum Risukei Evarim, and we stelz to the laws of Ziva, the laws of Muktzah, the laws of Kedushas Bechar. But the bottom line is, what emerged is that Rav Nachman holds Beis Harechem is Ein B'im Yishum Risukei Evarim. His whole chiddush even was, in the event that it went through the Beis Harechem, but if it was a Yotzei Doifin, it wouldn't have even been a Shaila. And another thing that emerged is that in the event it was Hifris Agabe Karka, that's like Gar Pashat. The whole chiddush of Beis Harechem, Ein B'im Yishum Risukei Evarim, is that there's no cheshbon at all. So, like, why would I assume that this animal might be a treifa? Because it was born? That's considered natural, meaning as much as it's a difficult procedure for the animal, but l'maisa, this is the way it is. And as a result, this is not something that we would do. Another Allah Rav Nachman said, very much So the background to this is that the sheichtim, before they shecht an animal, they would take the animal, they would knock it to the ground. They would, quote unquote, fell the animal. So they would knock it down to the ground. And Rav Nachman said that when they do that, that in of itself doesn't make Risukei Evar, right? That would be a shad. That mamash, a second before you're about to shech the animal, you chuck the animal, now all of a sudden you have to wait 24 hours, right? So, Beis HaMitbachayim, Ein B'im Mishum Risukei Evar, says the Gemara, a story. Who threw it enough? There was once a shard that fell in the Beis HaMitbachayim. V'shtame kol negechusei, and it made a very, very loud noise. Oh, Rabbi Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marta, shakal mishufri shufri. He came in, he says, I'm not worried. And he took me shufri shufri. He said, you give me the finest cut of this animal, I'm going to eat it. Amalei Rabbanon. So the Rabbanon told him, in halacha, how do you know this? Amalahu, so he told him, Hachi Amarav, I was makabel this from Rav. Tziparn of noyetz achem agil aretz. That when an animal is about to be slaughtered, it anticipates what's going on. And what it does is it claws its toenails, its feet and fingernails into the ground, and it tries to not get pushed in such a dramatic way. Because it has some control over its body at that point, so even if it falls, it's not this terrible fall, and as a result, it doesn't become a treifa. The only time it would be a treifa is if it's this reckless fall. But being that part of noyetz achem agil haaretz, so it's somewhat in control as it's falling, it's for that reason there's no issue. If an animal falls, Mishnah says, it's a treifa. We already gave away the fact that it's me'esleis. Here the Gemara says I'm a furish, but you should know if it stands up, it ain't a tzricha me'esleis. You don't even need the 24 hours. It's going to be okay. Bedika, stating that to do a bedika, some sort of examination to make sure that nothing is out of place. That you would need. So you don't have to wait 24 hours. You can do the bedika right away, but you're going to have to do a bedika. Holcha. Let's say it didn't just get up, but it literally picked itself up and it started walking, and it's tzricha bedika. They don't even need a bedika. Rashi said, it doesn't matter if it only got up and didn't walk, or if it got up and walked. Even where it got up and walked, if it stretched its hand out to get up, even if the poil didn't get up, at that point it doesn't need me'esleis. Meaning, when we say amda, you don't even have to be amda. As long as you're pashed yad, it's going to be fine. Akra ragla lahalich. Same is true as it relates to walking. If it stretched or lifted its leg to walk, even if it didn't walk, then it's going to be mutter. And whatever the halacha of holcha is, In a tzricha bedika, according to that mandama, you won't even need a bedika. Rav Chizda said, even if it just moved itself to get up, even if it didn't stand, and here's the chiddush, even if it wasn't pashta, even then it's gonna be okay. So Rabbi Yehuda Rav said amda. Rabbi Yirmiyah Bar Acha said in the name of Rav, even pashta is the equivalent of amda. Rav Chizna took it a step further. He said, even if it's near us, and near us, just like it chuckled a little bit. Pashta means it actually stretched out its hand. Amda means it physically got up. But even if it's near in the world of Rav Chizda, that in of itself is going to be okay. A little more Gemara. Amar Amema. We skip the parentheses. Mishmeid Rav Dimi ben Arda. Maybe say in the name of Rav Dimi ben Arda. Nefula sha'amru. When we say that a nefula sometimes needs bedika, so the halach is what kind of bedika does it need? Sricha bedika kineged b'nei me'ayin. You have to check the b'nei me'ayin area. So that's the area. It's in the intestinal area. Amalei Marzutra. I'll tell you what they say in the name of Rapapa. Sricha bedika kineged base hacholol kulai. No, you have to check the entire animal. It's not enough that you only check the b'nei me'ayin. Amalei huna mar bereder of Nechemia. Lirav Ashi. Simonim, do you have to check the simonim as well? Like, do you have to make sure that the kan and the veshet were in place? Amalei simonim koshen in eitzel nefila. No, the simonim are protected keneged nefila as much as you have to check the whole cholol. But in terms of checking the simonim, that's already something you don't have to check. The next Gemara is going to pivot and it's going to talk about birds that fall. So till now we're talking about behemoths that fall with all the halachas. The next Gemara is going to talk about birds. It's going to take us knee deep into tomorrow's daf. So we are going to stop here. So Baruch Hashem, another intense week of Daf Yomi. But just to end with two very light haras. The first hara is, yesterday we spoke a little bit about the pasuk in Parshas Kedoshim that tells the loisase of treifa. Va'anshe kodesh tiyunli ubasar basada treifa loisay chelu lakelev tashlicha noisay. The ikar point of the pasuk is ubasar basada treifa loisay chelu, which is the backdrop to Perikelu Treifas. The Torah prefaces the lav with the words va'anshe kodesh tiyunli. Additionally, the Torah tells you what exactly you're supposed to do with the treifa. What you do with it is lakelev tashlicha noisay. And yesterday's raid, we talked a little bit about what's this hakdama of Anshe Kodesh Tiyunli? And we related it to the pasuk in Parshas Re'eh that says Ki am kodesh atal Hashem alekecha, in the pasuk that talks about the nevela. It says that the nevela is not something you're allowed to eat, but you're supposed to give it to the ger or you sell it to the nachri. Additionally, the psukim in the end of Parshas Kedoshim and Parshas Shmini that talk about how Kedoshim Tiyu is an inyan that governs very much machalas asuras. So whenever you find machalas asuras, it comes together with this idea of the Anshe Kodesh Tiyunli. We spoke out the Chasam Sofer's kasha, that why do you have to take the basa basa the treifa and give it to the kelev as if some last resort because you have nothing to do with it? Why can't you be mevatel it? Be mevatel it, and once you be mevatel, at that point you'll be allowed to eat it. You'll tell me, "Ei mevatel nisel lechatchila." That's only nisel rabbanon. And the Chasam Sofer was mechadish that you see from here that even though ei mevatel nisel lechatchila in sugis hashas is a nisel rabbanon, that's when there's a taruvas lach balach where the davar aser is literally bottle. But to the extent that the davar aser is beend, it's going to be a taruvas yavish beyavish kuli alma moidi that ei ma'arvin. That a mevatlin iser lechatchila is going to be an iser de oiraisa. And the raya is literally from this pasuk. We mentioned that this chiddush states in the Noida Yehuda, but the bottom line is that was one hara that we spoke about. Another hara we mentioned is why can't you give it to a katan? And don't tell me chinuch, because chinuch is a derabanan. And katan oichel nevela bezdin is not mitzvah lehafrisha. You'll tell me loy sachilam. So hateinach if loy sachilam is true for all these surim, but dachreinim have a chakira that it could be it's only negay the three isurim that I mentioned mefurish in the Gemara in Yavamas Daf Kuf Yadal Amad Aleph, and treif is not one of them. Nevela is not one of them. So why is it when it comes to treif lakelef tashlicha? And what is it when it comes to the nevela? You give it to the ger or you give it to the nachri. Why can't you just go ahead and be mevatel it? We spoke out that it and give it to the katan. So we mentioned that it could be V'anshe Kodesh Tiyun Li. It's related to the Timtum Alev, the Kedusha, and there's an element of Timtum Alev that you have even when there's a bittul, right? That's the Isva Heter that the Pischei Tshuva brings in Kuf Tezayin. And even though the Soilus L'Mincha B'Shem, the Torah Hasham says, but we mentioned from the Chidah that Mitzad Kadesh Atzmach B'Mutalach in the world of Kedusha Yisera. So V'anshe Kodesh Tiyun Li is not only why we basad the Treifel Loisachelu, but it's also why La Kelev Tashlichana. That's just a little bit of chazara of what we spoke about in yesterday's daf. But I saw, just going through some of the Rishonim on this pasuk, V'anshe Kodesh Tiyun Li, something that made me stop in my tracks. And that is in the Abarbanel. The Abarbanel, who Kedarke B'Kodesh is being mefarish the psukim al pi pshutei shel mikra. It's been a while since we did Chumash here, or even the Haggadah Shiurim, which featured the Abarbanel very prominently. But the Abarbanel on this pasuk says as follows: Ve'efsher sheyiyeh hamaimer hazeh kimashmoi. It could be this pasuk V'anshe Kodesh Tiyun Li ubasa basal the treif aloisay chelut lakelav tashlichan oisay is meant to be taken kimashmoi. Very, very literally. The year in Yana, and the Indian is as follows: Shalayehu perutzim lechal hatreifos shenitrafu basada. That you shouldn't be reckless and just eat the treifos that were trampled in the field. Kedarke hagoyim nichbedeim v'sareihem, which was the custom of the Eini Yehudim. Their nichbedeim, their nobles, v'sareihem, and their ministers. Sheyelchu lotzitzai batzada. They would go hunting. And when they would go hunting, they would bring their dog together with them. And they would hunt, and the dog would hunt. And whatever they would catch, they themselves, the noble people, would eat. So it's for that reason the Torah said, that you should be Kedoshim, says the Torah. Because in the event that you're going to decide, you, the Anshe Kodesh, you want to go hunting, lis ales, you're going to do exactly what the Nechbadim will do. That's fine. But in the event that you're going to go and you're going to catch animals through the klavim, the klavim are going to be the ones that are going to catch. The kedoshim, you shouldn't eat it. The dog should go ahead and eat it. So it seems that there was this old custom that people would go out and they would hunt. And when they would hunt, they would go together with the dogs. They would catch, the dogs would catch, and they would eat everything. It didn't matter if they caught it or if the dogs caught it. You shouldn't do that. So that when you go hunting with your dogs, if the dog catches it, like Kelev Tashlichan, I say he should eat it, you should not eat it. So the Ubasa Basad, the treifa, while you're hunting, how did it become a treifa? From the dog. The dog is what tore it apart. Let the dog eat what it tore apart, because that's already a bechin of Anshe Kodesh. The Abarbanel seems to be saying that it's okay to go hunting. In fact, the Torah is talking to the hunter. And by the way, you know what we're describing the hunter as? V'anshe Kodesh tiyui. So when you hunt, do it like Anshe Kodesh. Don't do it like regular nichbadim and sarim. Your hunting should be different. Shlo yehei ha-hunting shal kodesh ka-hunting shal chol. That's what we're saying over here. V'anshe kodesh tiyui, and that's the way that you should go out and you should do the hunting. And l'may nafkim, in the event that the kelev is going to go ahead and he's going to chop something, so they would say, oh, perfect, dog works for me, thank you for lunch, thank you for dinner. No, if the kelev is the one that created and caused the ubasa basada treifa loisa chelu, in that situation, like kelev tashlich and oisai. What's the maramakim? Of course, the maramakim is the Noida B'Yehuda. Shailas Shuvas Noida B'Yehuda, Yeredeya, Madura Tinyana, Simin Yud, where this fellow sends the Shaila to the Noida B'Yehuda. Remember his name? Gumfricht Oppenheim. So Gumfricht Oppenheim sends his Shaila to Noida B'Yehuda. He's this very, very wealthy person, and he owns acres and acres of land, and he likes to go hunting sometimes. And he asked him from a halachic perspective, Tzar Bali Chayim, and Ushmartem Oibla Nafshei Seichem, Bal Tashches, all the different Shailas. But then the Noida B'Yehuda tells him, Me'omna Mo'edani Tamei Al Guf HaDavar, V'loi Matzinu Ish Tzayid Rak B'Nimrod U'Be'esav, Ve'ein Zed Darki B'nei Avram, Yitzchak V'Yakov. This is his famous line that he tells him. It's an often Abarbanel. The Abarbanel says, Anshe Kodesh Tiyun, you could hunt. But you have to do it differently. You don't hunt the way the people that are not Kedoshim hunt. Again, this is fascinating. This Noida B'Yehuda is the gift that keeps on giving. This is the first very light ha'ara. The second light ha'ara is, so the Gemara told a story in today's daf. A few stories. but one a little longer than the others. Amalei Rav Safra Abaye. Rav Safra told Abaye, Chazim mar haitzum rabbanon das me'arava. There's a yid that came from Eretz Yisrael. V'amar, he said, Rabbi Avira Shmeni. He said, my name is Rabbi Avira. V'amar, he said, Maisa, there was a story. Ubalifnei Rebbe machat shenimtzas b'evi beis hakoyz b'tzad echad. At least that's the way the story was presented initially, where somebody brought a animal, beis hakoyz, there was a machat that was there on one side, and Rebbe said it's a treifa. And when Abaye heard this, he says, what? I thought only if it's on two sides, not if it's on one side. And Abaye goes to great lengths, literally, to track down Rabbi Avira, and he asks Rabbi Avira, tell me exactly how did the story go down. He tells him the rest of the story, and then Abaye, for this, this story that I was told is not really the way it happened, and I regret, I'm toyal arishonis, why I even went to go and track you down, because really there was nothing newsworthy over here. This whole story was really a mefurish Mishnah. So when Rav Safra tells the story initially to Abaye, he tells him, Chazim mar haitzum rabbanon da'asim imarava. V'amar, when he came from Eretz Yisrael, we asked him his name, he said, Rabbi Avira Shmeni. My name is Rabbi Avira. Rabbi Margolis, like only Rabbi Margolis could, asks a kasha on this Gemara. A kasha from a Gemara in Masechtes Pesachim, Daf Pei Vav Amud Beis. The Gemara says, Rav Huna Breder Rav Nassan, Ikla Lebei Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. So Rav Huna Breder Rav Nassan once came. He was a guest by Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. Amrulei. So the people in Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak's house turned to Rav Huna Breder Rav Nassan, and they asked him, Mashmach, what's your name? Amalusa. He told them, Rav Huna. My name is Rav Huna. Amru, so they said, Nesem Marapurya. So could you please sit down? Yosef, he sat down. Yovalei Kasa. They gave him a glass of wine. This was old school. Kabla b'chad zimna. As soon as they offered him the wine, he took it. Meaning, he didn't say, nah, it's okay, I don't need it. Oh, you want me to take it? No problem. No. He took it right away. And when he took the wine, he didn't twirl it. And no, he just took it in 2 gulps. He drank the entire cup of wine. Not just that, but there's a certain minig of tznius that when you drink wine, you go a little to the side and you drink it. No, it's not what he did. They turned to him and they said, my time of Karas Lach Rav Huna. I asked you your name, you tell me your name is Rav Huna? I mean, your name is Huna. Who talks about themselves that way? Amalus Rav Huna, I'll be honest with you. Bala Shemani. Rashni says, Mikatanusi kach kairli Rav Huna. They used to call me Rav Huna since I'm young, and you asked me my name. I know, since I'm a little boy, I'm known as Rav Huna, and it's for that reason, that's what I told him. And then Gemara says, they asked him all these different minhagim that he did, that the Gemara thinks was a little bit mechudishtik, and that's the whole sugya that's going on over there. But here we have a Gemara, where Rav Huna walks into Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak's house. What's your name? And he says, my name is Rav Huna. And they're very taken aback. Rav Huna? You call yourself Huna. That's Gaifa, right? Why would you call yourself Rav Huna? And he responded. His response was that, since I'm young, they used to refer to me as Rav Huna. So I don't know, since I'm a little kid, this is always the way they called me. Well, if that's the case, how come when this Subrim Rabbanan, whose name was Rabbi Avira, came to Rav Safra, and they asked him, what's your name? He said, Rabbi Avira Shmeini. How come they didn't ask him, Rav Avira, call yourself Avira? That's Rabbi Margol's Zahara. In Pesachim Pei Vav Amud Beis, when Rav Huna said that my name is Rav Huna, everybody was very taken aback. Why are you calling yourself Rav Huna? No one talks that way. If that's the case, why is it that when Rabbi Avira said that my name is Rabbi Avira, they didn't call him out for the same thing? So Rabbi Margol, the Teretz is Pashat. What did Rabbi Avira say? He said, Rabbi Avira Shmeini. That was what he said. Chazim mar haitzum rabbanon da'asam imarava va'amar Rabbi Avira Shmeini. My name is Rabbi Avira. The whole lashon is a little bit funny. My name is Rabbi Avira. They asked him his name. He said, Avira. Rabbi Avira Shmeini. He said, the teretz is, what he was trying to say is that my name is not Avira. Oh, but I prefer to be referred to. I prefer the moniker as Rav Avira. What he was saying is, my name is Rav Avira. Like this Chaim Yankel, I'm Rav, my first name. Avira is my second name. When Rav Huna was asked his name, Rav Huna said, Rav Huna. He didn't say Rav Huna Shmeini, das is my nomen, and that's why they were very taken aback. Rav Huna, no one talks this way. And what was his response? His response was that, no, this is always the way I've been known. In fact, Rashi muches a little bit. Rashi says that, what does it mean this is always me? Katnusi kach koirli Rav Huna. it could be what he was saying was, no, my name is not Huna, and I like referring to myself as rabbi. My name is Rav Huna. But the reason they asked him is because when they said Mashmach, he simply said Rav Huna. But when Rabbi Avira said Rabbi Avura Shmeini, they understood that Hisafa was coming to say that my name is actually Rabbi Avira. But here's the point. The point is that Rabbi Avira's name is not Avira, but he prefers the title Rav. His name is Rav Avira. Why did Rabbi Margol say this? What's his objective? So it's mentioned Bekitzer right here in the Tzutzayar. It's mentioned very much not Bekitzer in a Sefer L'Cheker Shemes V'Kinuyim, and it's under the Mechkar called Baal Du Shem. So we've mentioned many times over the years, the Chassam Sofer and the Neder Yehuda, they were both very Meirich, the Nachas Shiva, and they talk about how once upon a time nobody had two names. This is one of the most brilliant Mechkarim in the whole lexicon of Torah from the great guy in Rabbi Margos. But he says that they all said that you don't find anywhere that anybody had to. Even this man of the Rishonim, you couldn't find people that had today. Everybody has 2 names, 3 names, 4 names. But once upon a time, he said nobody had 2 names. Instead, Rabbi Margolis, he goes through nuanced ways where he believes he found people with 2 names. It's not obvious. It's not, what's your name, Rav Chizda Papa. That'd be easy. But no, things that you would never think. And this Gemara right here, Chulin and Aleph and Aleph, in the world of Rav Reuven Margolis, was a person that had 2 names. What are the 2 names? Rav is one name, and Avira is the other name. That's Rav Avira Shmeini. The Hod Raya, they didn't call him out on it the way they did to Rav Reuven in the Gemara. This is classic Rav Reuven Margolis. And Rav Reuven Margolis says, there's always a punchline, right? He says, I'll prove to you that I'm right. This is mamish epic. So subtle, but again, classic, right? We do this a lot. This is classic. He says, we know, everybody knows this. Anyone that's ever learned Gemara knows this, that in Bavel, someone that got smicha, they used to refer to as Rav. And in Eretz Yisrael, if somebody had smicha, they would always refer to him as Rebbe. Right? There's a Rashi in Ksuba somewhere that talks about Reb Zera. Rav Zera and Rebbe Zera. So Rashi, Rav Zera was from Bavel, because in Bavel, everyone's a Rav. And Rebbe Zera is from Eretz Yisrael, because in Eretz Yisrael, everybody's a Rebbe. Who is this person? Amale Rav Safra Labayo, Chazimar, Haitzubim Rabbana, Da'asim Imarava. He came from Eretz Yisrael. So if he came from Eretz Yisrael, why is he Rav Avira? He should be Rebbe Avira. The teretz is, that was his name, Rav Avira Shmeini. And he goes in the footnote, Rabbi Margolis says that it could be, with this, he could be Miyashiv. He says, because there are other examples where you find some of the Bnei Eretz Yisrael were referred to as Rav, and he says, Mi Oideya, he's thinking out loud, Mi Oideya, if all those Ravs are talking our Ravs, and it's not a kasha on Rashi's klal, that every single time you find Rav, it's Bal Korchach Bavel, and when you find Rebbe, it's from Eretz Yisrael. It could be, in those cases also, these are Balei Dushem. These are people with 2 names, and that's why it's Rav, because Rav is actually the Ershtana. Now, where did we speak about this recently? We just spoke about the name Rav. We spoke about it in the Machlekes Rashi and Taisus that we had not so long ago, where Shmuel used to refer to Rav as Abba. And the shaila is, why do you refer to him as Abba? Rashi says he used to refer to him as Abba Miloshin Kovet. Taisus says he used to refer to him as Abba, that was his name, Abba Aricha. And the question is that according to Taisus, so Rav's real name is Abba. Now, why is he known as Rav? Rav Shel Kol Bnei Agoyla. But according to Rashi, that he was referred to as Abba Miloshin Kovet, and presumably Rav Miloshin Kovet. Well, if that's the case, what's his name? It's like Reuven Margolis. You know what I think his name is? I think his name is really Rav. I think his name is Rav. I think that's his name. I actually think his name is Rav. And Hagabatzmacha, if his name is not Rav, and they're calling him Rav because he's Rav Shel Kol Bnei Agoyla, so Shmuel, when he wants to be Mechabed him, he downgrades him, and instead of calling him Rav, he calls him Abba. It doesn't make any sense. Elamai, his name was Rav. Now, where do you find Snok Rav Margolis, anyone whose name was Rav? So at the time, we mentioned 4 examples. We mentioned Rav Bar Shaba, we mentioned Rav Acha Bar Rav, we mentioned Rami Bar Rav, right? We mentioned a few different places where you find the name Rav. Here's another Rav. Rav Avira Shmeini. It's one of 2 names. His first name was Rav. His second name was Avira. The bottom line is, this is classic Rabbi Margolis. And where's he coming to this mechates? His name was probably Rav Avira. No, because if his name is probably Avira and he's calling himself Rav because ich bin a Rebbe. I'm known as Rav Shel Kol Bnei Agoyla, B'nan Shel Gedoshim. Call me Rav Avira. If that's the case, how come the Gemara then asked the same kasha on Rav Avira that they asked to Rav Huna in a Mefurish Gemara Masechtas Pesachim Peivav on the base? It's interesting. In one of the footnotes here, Rabbi Margolis says that it's Yitachin, that the reason people would give their child the name Rav was because, they were hoping. It was like a tefillah. They wanted that this child should grow up and should be Zoicha to become a Rav. He says, Mashal Amad Davadayma, you find in the Gemara the name Keshisha, Mar Keshisha. Keshisha, Rabbi Margol says, was a name. What does Keshisha mean? It means old, right? It means old. Mar Zutra, Mar Keshisha. But he says Keshisha was old. People used to give the name Keshisha. It's one of his theories. That's a real name. It's a Shem Ha'etzem. Where do you even find something like that? So he says, what do you mean? In Yiddish, people today give the name Alter. Right? What's the name Alter? Alter means you should be Zoicha to be Marich Yom and Vishanim. So you see there's a name called Alter. That name Alter has its roots in the Gemara already, he says. He says, you find the name Keshisha. He says, I'm going to tell you one other one. I'll tell you one other one. And that is the name Bachya. The name Bachya, that's a Sephardic name. And who is Bachya? So there's two Rabbeinu Bachyas, right? Rabbeinu Bachaya, Bachya. I know everybody gets excited when you say Bachya or Bachaya. If you say Bachya, all the Bachaya chevra get excited. And if you say Bachaya, you don't know it's Bachya. It's a shayla. So the bottom line is Rabbeinu Bachya. It was the Baal Chavis Havavis is Rabbeinu Bachya. And of course, Rabbeinu Bachya, the Rabbeinu Bachya. So he says that there's a lot, the academics are like very mesupik. No one really knows Rabbeinu Bachaya, Rabbeinu Bachya, ala Torah is. He says he's heard a lot of on this. So I'll just tell you, I'll read to you one last excerpt. Ba'ila's biography is Shali. Okay, so some biography work. It was never a real name. That you should be Zoicha Tarichas Yomim, like Alter. So Rabbeinu Bachya is like saying Rab Alter. It's a very, very similar concept. That's the idea. For Rabbeinu Bachya, Hanoide Besifrei ala Torah. The famous Rabbeinu Bachya, who wrote his Pirush al HaTorah, and who wrote the Kada Kemach, right? It's the same author, Rabbi Yehuda HaYishmai. You should know his name was Rabbi Yehuda, his name wasn't Bachya. His name was Rabbi Yehuda. Ubekulfin, Biksav Yad, Mefurish, Besoif Sefer Kad HaKemach. He said that he found that in the end of the Sefer Kad HaKemach, now this Kad HaKemach, he found in a Ksav Yad. I'm going to try to read this. It's Les Manuscriptos Hebreo La Real Biblioteca Madrid. So he said he found this. It's Rabbi Margolis, right? So he saw it once, and obviously it was stored away somewhere. But the bottom line is, this came from some Hebreo Biblioteca in Madrid, Spain, and he finds there in this library a Ksav of the original Kada Kemach. Amazing. And this is what it says at the end. Bekan Nishlam Kada Kemach Asher Chiber Harav Rabbi Yehuda ben Harab Osher HaMechuna Rabbi Bachya, who's known as Rabbi Bachya. But either way, he says he found it beforish in a library in Madrid, Spain. The bottom line is, Bachya says he doesn't think it was a Shem Atzim, but it was like a kinoi l'skuli. Rav was also a kinoi. So I don't know, does it mean that at the bris it was Yikarish Mabi Yisrael? Bachya doesn't sound like Rabbeinu Bachya. Alter is a name you give it a bris. Rav, I think also a name you give it a bris, but it goes off on a little bit of a tangent, and he talks about different names that you find that people used to give. Pasha B'Lashon Skuli, Rav, Bachya, Alter, Barash Negelin, Yonenu. The name Rav is a little bit tricky. You have Rav as in Rav, and sometimes Rav could be a Shem Ha'etzem, and it chaps fascinating nafkaminas. Number one, could be that was the name of the great Amira Rav, just like Shmuel's name was Shmuel, Rav's name was Rav. It could be, if that's the case, you're going to have people that had two names. With the Chassam Sofer that said, no one ever had two names. Well, if Rav could be a Shem Ha'etzem, Rav Avira could be two names. So anyone who has the preface of Rav, you might have to ask yourself, maybe his first name is really Rav. And it would also be Miyashiv, the cloud that every child knows, that it's a Rashi and Ksubas, that Rav is from Bavel and Rebbe is from Eretz Yisrael. Ayamo, you find someone that comes from like Rabbi Avira, and you find that he's referred to as a Rav. The teretz is he's not being referred to Rav as some sort of lashon of chashivas. He's being referred to as Rav because his name is Rav. So the yisoid is that Rav could be a Shem Ha'etzem, and once you know that, there's a lot of mechkarim that can flow from there. Ayin Heitev in the Sfarim of Rav Reuven Margolis. This is very much Divrei Pi Chacham Chen. The Ru'uyin Hadvarim L'Misha Amra.